All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we're about to get started. Just want to thank you all for coming out today. My name's Mark Duffy. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Fair Trade of Hardwood Plywood, and it's great to have you all with us. We're here today because China is not playing by the rules, and its illegal trade tactics are hurting thousands of hardworking Americans employed in the U.S. hardwood plywood industry. Over the last 2 years, the influx of Chinese hardwood plywood products into the U.S. has increased by over 40%. The Chinese are selling their products into the U.S. at dump prices, well below cost, to gain an unfair competitive advantage. Several thousand American jobs are under threat because of China not adhering to international trade norms. China's tactics not only threaten the U.S. hardwood plywood industry, but the thousands of indirect jobs in various sectors across the United States. In late 2016, the Coalition for Fair Trade of Hardwood Plywood filed a petition with the U.S. Department of Commerce and U.S. International Trade Commission to help save thousands of U.S. hardwood plywood jobs. If things move forward and China is held to account, it will be the first concrete example of the Trump administration moving forward with a major trade case against the People's Republic of China. This was the first trade case that was filed after Donald Trump was elected. I'm pleased today to be joined by three distinguished panelists for a robust discussion about how to solve the challenges that threaten thousands of American workers in the U.S. hardwood plywood industry. United States Senator Ron Wyden, CEO of Columbia Forest Products, Brad Thompson, and Tim Brightbill, partner at Wiley Ryan and counsel for the coalition. We're going to start our discussion with opening remarks from each of our panelists. Afterwards, I'll follow up by asking our distinguished panelists a few simple questions, and then we're going to open up to the floor for questions from reporters and our attendees. And then at the end, we're going to air a very powerful short documentary that shows the devastating impact of China's cheating on the U.S. hardwood plywood industry. We have testimonials from workers in Oregon, North Carolina, and upstate New York. So firstly, I'm truly honored to introduce U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. He's the senior United States Senator from Oregon. Senator Wyden has represented the great state of Oregon since 1996 in the Senate, and he currently serves as the ranking member on finance. Most importantly, Senator Wyden has a strong record of trade enforcement, and he's devoted a large part of his political career to fighting for free and fair trade. Senator, the floor is yours, sir.
Mark, thanks so much, and I'm going to make this a filibuster-free zone because I think you're going to enjoy hearing from my colleagues as well. For nearly 2 centuries, the forestry sector has been the backbone of resource-dependent communities across my home state of Oregon. Hardworking men and women could get steady jobs in places where good-paying employment sometimes can be pretty scarce. When you travel our state and visit those small towns, those small cities, it is clear that even as the Oregon economy has changed over the years, these mill jobs remain vitally important. But today, it seems that almost a host of new parties are getting in the game of ripping off our mill communities and their jobs. Whether it's our neighbor to the north sending subsidized softwood lumber flooding into the United States, or China shipping subsidized and dumped hardwood plywood, our mill towns face a whole array of brand new challenges. For hardwood plywood, China has been using government subsidies to give an unfair advantage to its producers. Then it unleashes a flood of subsidized product onto the U.S. market. This is, in effect, page 1 of the Chinese playbook as it relates to unfair trade practices. American companies get cut out of the market even as U.S. demand was growing, making it harder than ever for these mill towns to survive. It's not just the mill workers that are affected when a mill shuts down. It puts the mom and pop shops, the grocery stores, the restaurants, all the Main Street is in danger of closing in these communities and closing for good when hardworking people lose their paychecks. And of course, it breeds pessimism about the future. And it's why I've been pushing back so hard as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, the committee with jurisdiction over trade, to stop these unfair trade practices from decimating mill towns in Oregon and across the country. Now, too often, relief under U.S. law has been simply too late to save the jobs and prevent these kinds of disasters. So I pushed very hard last year to toughen the tools that would be available to fight unfair trade, to make it easier for companies to show that there is real and demonstrable harm, and to make sure that when relief is granted, the trade cheats can't just find an easy way to skirt the law. And we certainly saw that when I ran a sting investigation, literally a phony website inviting rip-off artists to cheat several years ago when I was chairman of the trade subcommittee. So we can't let the trade cheats skirt the law, and right now I'm focused on ensuring that this administration fully implements the law that I helped pass last year, uses the new tools, and demonstrates the resources needed to ensure that our producers can get the relief they deserve. So you hear lots of people talk tough. Certainly in the campaign season, the airwaves are just filled with all of this tough, chest-pounding kind of talk. And by the way, tough tweets are even cheaper. And what mill workers need now are real results. So I'm pleased the International Trade Commission earlier this year agreed with me and the coalition and found that the industry met the standard for relief under U.S. law. But that is just the beginning. There's a long road ahead before this industry gets the relief it deserves, and we are going to continue to keep fighting to make sure that that relief does get to American workers. So I very much appreciate you all having me here today. Look forward to our other guests and questions.
Thank you, Senator. Secondly, I would like to introduce Mr. Brad Thompson. Brad is the CEO of Columbia Forest Products. It's America's largest manufacturer of hardwood plywood and hardwood veneer products. Prior to joining Columbia, Mr. Thompson held technical and managerial positions at Champion International and the Weyerhaeuser Company. Mr. Thompson holds an MBA from Purdue, and he has been involved in the industry for over 35 years. So, Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and for that kind introduction, and Senator Wyden for your comments. We really appreciate them. And thank you, yes, for joining us today. And I'm here to discuss I'm truly honored to be here before you today to discuss the significant economic contribution the U.S. hardwood plywood industry makes to the U.S. economy. My firm, Columbia Forest Products, founded in 1957, is America's largest manufacturer of hardwood plywood and hardwood veneer products. Today, Columbia's decorative veneer, interior veneers and panels are used in high-end cabinetry, fine furniture, architectural millwork, and commercial fixtures. At its core, Columbia Forest Products is like a family. And in our family, we employ over 2,000 hardworking Americans. We are an employee-owned company, an ESOP. All of our employees own a piece of the company. And it strives to create good-paying American jobs, and we strive to do the right thing. In small rural communities in North Carolina, Oregon, Arkansas, West Virginia, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Maine, Vermont, and Virginia. Currently, the U.S. hardwood plywood industry is under threat because of China's illegal trade practices. Over the last 2 years, Chinese hardwood plywood products have increased by over 40%, decimating the U.S. hardwood plywood industry, and that is negatively impacting American jobs. Chinese products are being sold into the United States at dumped prices, well below cost by the Chinese so they gain an unfair competitive advantage. In China, the hardwood plywood manufacturers receive illegal government subsidies such as tax breaks, discounted land and raw materials. Declining sales and profitability and loss of market share have rendered the U.S. hardwood plywood industry vulnerable. Here in the United States, thousands of American jobs in the U.S. hardwood plywood industry are under threat because of Chinese illegal trade practices. I'm here not only to represent Columbia Forest Products, but I'm here to represent my industry partners, Timber Products, Roseburg Forest Products, States Industries, Murphy Plywood, and Commonwealth Plywood. China's actions not only threaten the hardwood plywood industry, but also the thousands of indirect jobs in various sectors across the United States. In 2015 alone, the total value of hardwood plywood imports from China was $1.1 billion, and that number is continuing to increase significantly. If nothing changes, China continues to dump hardwood plywood products into the United States. The whole industry could cease to exist. To put it plainly, the U.S. hardwood plywood industry cannot compete with dumped product from China. Thousands of good-paying American jobs are under immediate threat, and if the U.S. government does not take action soon, American workers will be negatively impacted. At Columbia Forest Products, through the onslaught of Chinese invasion into the U.S. hardwood plywood industry, we have done everything we can do to reinvest in our industry and put American workers first. In late 2016, the Coalition for Fair Trade of Hardwood Plywood, which Columbia Forest Products supports, filed a petition with the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. International Trade Commission to help save thousands of U.S. hardwood plywood jobs and stop China's illegal trade practices. In simple terms, the petition lays out how imports of hardwood plywood are being sold into the United States at dumped prices and shows the extent of illegal government subsidies that Chinese producers of hardwood plywood products receive. We await the U.S. Commerce Department's preliminary and final determinations in anti-dumping duty investigation of hardwood plywood from China, expected in June 2017 and November of 2017. On behalf of Columbia Forest Products and the industry, we applaud all the work that has been undertaken by the U.S. Commerce Department so far. The stakes here are high, but things are moving in the right direction. As an employee-owned company, that puts American workers first. We respectfully encourage our political leaders and U.S. Commerce Department to stand up for thousands of U.S. hardwood plywood workers. Acting now against China's illegal trade practices will safeguard the future of thousands of hardworking men and women across the country and who depend on the U.S. hardwood plywood industry to raise their families. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much, Brad. And I would like to open the floor now to Tim Brightbill of Wiley Ryan, who's the counsel for the coalition.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I imagine you can hear from a trade lawyer any day, and we know the senator's time is very limited, so I'll keep my remarks brief and answer questions afterwards. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. And in particular, as a trade lawyer, I'd like to thank you for providing the tools to fight unfair trade. It's been an honor to work with you and other members of Congress on a variety of these cases, everything from steel to solar panels and now hardwood plywood. So the problem, as you're going to see in the video, the very powerful video in just a few minutes, one of the workers on camera says that in the hardwood plywood industry, what's going on represents one of the greatest trade thefts in the history of our country. I think that's a very accurate statement, given my years as a lawyer. What I've seen go on in this industry is very similar to what China has done in many other industries. As the senator said, it's right out of page 1 of China's playbook. Massive overcapacity developed by state subsidies, an array of subsidies, loans, grants, discounted land, discounted timber, discounted raw materials. That results in dumping into the United States, which has a very open market. It then results in a price collapse, and it results in harm to the domestic industry, companies like Columbia Forest Products and all 6 companies out of our coalition. I think it's also important to point out that China doesn't have a comparative advantage in making hardwood plywood. This domestic industry is extremely competitive, and it's forced to compete head-to-head every day on the store shelves at Lowe's and Home Depot and the stores that we all go to. What they can't compete with is dumped and subsidized and unfairly traded imports from China. So we're at a very important part of the case. The case is going well so far. We've won a preliminary injury determination unanimously from the International Trade Commission, and we won very high preliminary subsidy duties at the Commerce Department, ranging from 9% to over 100%. And I can give you some more details on that later as well. The next key date in the case is mid-June, when the preliminary dumping duties go into place. And again, we're looking for positive results from the Commerce Department at that phase. And then we'll have the final injury phase of the investigation later this year, where we will demonstrate to the Commission, unfortunately, how harmed this industry and its workers have been from the dumping and the subsidies and the unfair trade practices. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we have a few questions that we can go through, and I'll be happy to answer questions later as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for your great comments. So just turning to yourself, Senator, as I know your time is limited. Looking, you're a trade enforcer. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what do you see as the biggest challenges for trade enforcement this year?
Well, obviously the trade enforcement plate is very full, and this goes right again to the heart of what's on the mind of the American people. As I mentioned, I'm having town hall meetings across the state, and I think people are increasingly saying it's one thing to talk about new trade agreements, and there are going to be areas where that's going to be vitally important. It's another thing to enforce the laws on the books. And in order to build credibility for future trade policies, there needs to be a stronger effort to show that you are going to be serious about enforcing the laws on the books and not just kind of going through the motions and saying, oh, yeah, of course we'll enforce, the laws, and then you see everybody chase after new agreements. So here's my sense of the major challenges on the enforcement front, and I'll just kind of tick through a few of them. Obviously, with respect to China, we continue to face a glut of excess steel and aluminum and commodities coming from China. This distorts global prices and really harms American jobs. And so that is front and center in terms of the challenges. Secretary Ross announced what he called a major deal with China, but it didn't get into overcapacity questions. So I have been urging the administration to redouble their efforts on the overcapacity issue and get a real fix for this problem. And it seems to me, again, after all the really tough, vocal discussion that we heard during the campaign season, you got to go to the big issues. You can't just go to the low-hanging fruits. That's number one. Number two, making sure that you really carry out the laws that we enacted last year. I think we gave them a serious upgrade. We modernized them so as to deal, for example, with trade cheats that I described that we saw were so blatant in that sting operation. You got to make sure if you pass an enforcement law that it is actually implemented. So I have been very clear to the administration they've got to follow through. That includes the Enforce Act that I authored to stop foreign companies from evading our trade remedy laws and to take advantage of the improvements we made in the trade remedy laws as well. Next, they have to fill the International Trade Commission. This is a critical spot. We don't have a full slate of commissioners there. And if you're filing a petition for trade relief, you got to be pretty worried right now about the fact that it's not exactly all hands on deck there. So getting the commission back to full force is a third priority. We need to get the Democrat slot filled on the commission, and that will be a priority for me as well. And finally, strong trade enforcement requires boots on the ground and a whole government focus on unfair trade at the borders. I have talked with the president about this personally. This was one of the key issues I brought up when Chairman Hatch and Chairman Brady and Congressman Neal and I met with the president, and that was to make sure that we really had the strong enforcement boots on the ground. And that means experts at the Forest Service who are trained to identify stolen lumber before it crosses the border, experts from the Department of Labor who can identify goods that are made with slave labor, because Senator Brown and I wrote legislation to crack down on that practice, and other professionals are obviously needed as well. And I think it would be charitable to say the administration is sending mixed messages on the question of funding these agencies. There's been a lot of uncertainty around the budget, and so trade enforcement resources would be a challenge. So let me use that by way of starting in terms of the big trade enforcement challenges. I'd say China. I'd say enforcing the laws that we passed last year, the Enforce Act in particular, that I was the author of, filling the International Trade Commission, and then ensuring that you got the people on the ground to do this kind of work. I mean, you've got to have people who can make sophisticated judgments with respect to how people who ought to know better are evading the laws.
Thank you, Senator. I totally agree with your comments. Just a follow-up question to that. I know you've been fighting to ensure that U.S. trade remedy law is not weakened when it comes to China, and specifically that China continues to be treated as a non-market economy in cases such as ours. This has been a top priority for many companies. How do you see that issue playing out in the next few months?
Let me give you my take on the non-market economy, issue and sort of what's ahead. I think there is widespread agreement that China does not operate like a market economy. And Chairman Hatch and I and our counterparts at the Ways and Means Committee have made it clear that we share that judgment. We've sent multiple letters on that point. China has now, however, challenged U.S. and European non-market economy rules. They did that at the World Trade Organization. And the point of these rules is to make sure that our companies get full protection from unfair trade from China. And it looks to me like China is almost making a purposeful judgment to move ahead with the European case as a strategy to divide us. And if they're successful, they would make it much tougher to keep our trade remedies at full force. That would have a serious impact on the effectiveness of our trade remedy laws when it comes to China. So this is, again, immediate. It's high stakes. I have made this point with Commissioner Malmstrom specifically, the importance of having Europe be on the same page as our country with respect to non-market economy issues. And I believe the Commissioner, based on her answers to me, understand how hard it is that we keep that very strong bond between the United States and Europe on this issue. We've sent our staff to Geneva. They've also made it clear to officials there. And the united front between the United States and Europe on this question also is very crucial with respect to follow up as it relates to China. And I very much share the view, Mark, again, that this is a question, to me, of translating all of this, really tough, strong, you'll never see anybody enforce the laws like us kind of talk from the campaign, actually making it happen now in the real world.
Thank you. And then just one final question, because I know you have a another rush off for another meeting. Could you just speak a little bit about what you hear firsthand from your constituents who are employed in the U.S. hardwood wood plywood industry? Are they concerned about what's going on in the industry, and what are they asking the American government to do? You know, what do you hear when you go back to Oregon?
Well, I think they have heard so much rhetoric from politicians on this issue. What they're waiting to see is whether there's actually some there, whether there's going to be some follow-up. And Brad and everybody else knows, you know, I decided to do something nobody had ever done in our state, and that was to have open meetings in every county every year. They go for 90 minutes. And I think next week we'll have like number 820. These issues of trade enforcement come up at every single meeting. And you look out in the crowd and you see the worry on the faces of the workers. People who've always said, if we just get a fair shake in the marketplace, the kind of people who work at Columbia, we just get a fair shake in the marketplace, we can beat the pants off everybody. But if you send us into this global enterprise, which is what it is, we're not competing against the person down the street anymore. We're competing in a global, enterprise, and the field is so stacked, against us because we play by the rules, and too many of the people who are supposed to be working with us decide to evade the rules. It's pretty hard. And I'll just close again by commenting on how brazen the trade cheats have actually gotten. When we did that sting operation, we were really concerned about things like merchandise laundering, where a group of trade cheats would in effect get busted in one country, and they basically just leap a few hundred miles off to another country and put a different stamp on what they were sending the United States, and in effect engage in merchandise laundering. So this is not particularly subtle stuff. The trade cheats have banked on the odds that they would not be caught. That's what this is about. They have gone into this saying, there's a lot of rhetoric in the United States about tough trade law, but they're cutting, for example, the staff, as I just mentioned. They're not filling, the key positions. So what we're talking about is showing that we have an aggressive plan to actually ensure that American workers get the benefit of the chance to compete in the global marketplace. I'm going to emphasize that and close with that. Nobody here is asking for advantage. This is just a chance to be part in a competitive economy of a sector that too often has been ripped off by people who ought to know better and benefit from their relationship with us. So I apologize for the bad manners. When you sit on the Finance Committee and the Intelligence Committee, you have some busy days right now.
Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So just following on from that, we were just going to couple of quick, deeper dive on the issue with Brad. Brad, could you just talk a little bit about the changes you've seen in the industry? I know you've been involved in the industry for over 35 years, but can you just talk about the changes you've seen since the Chinese have started selling their dumped products into the U.S.?
Sure, Mark. I think it starts rather insidious, where the Chinese have gone in and taken our most basic SKUs, the things easy to knock off, and to begin to produce those at subsidized and dumped prices to the point where they gain share, and then they begin moving down the value chain. And now they're in all aspects of our hardwood plywood segment, from high end to low end, and it manifests itself eventually into what we've seen in the last number of years, to layoffs, to plant closures in the industry. Columbia Forest Products last year alone had to send workers from its various plants home 60 days because of lack of orders. And to the point now, as I mentioned in my comments, Chinese imports have increased 40% since 2013, while our domestic industry has contracted. So it's at the breaking point now.
No, definitely. And then I know, Tim, could you just tell us, we've heard a lot about Chinese subsidies, but could you explain to the folks who are with us today and everyone who's joining us online, what are the different types of Chinese subsidy programs that the Commerce Department is investigating?
Sure, Mark. Commerce is looking at more than 30 different subsidy programs, and it's things that we're well familiar with from China's behavior in many other industries. So it ranges everywhere from outright grants from the government at a national or regional or local level to loans from state-owned and state-controlled commercial banks. The vast majority of the banking sector in China, of course, is state-controlled. And then you have all of the inputs that are subsidized. So everything from land and lumber, of course, a huge input there, and logs, to electricity, to all the other raw materials that are used to make this. So it's more than 30 subsidy programs. As we said, it resulted in very high preliminary margins, as high as 100% on one of the specific 2 companies that was investigated, and many other Chinese companies are paying that rate as well. These rates may increase further in the final determination at Commerce before we're all done.
No, absolutely. You know, I think just want to touch on something you said, Brad, a moment ago. If the U.S. government doesn't act, are you concerned about the future of the hardwood plywood industry? Do you foresee it going away?
Yeah,
or
Mark, no, the statistics are clear. We're less than 50% capacity. You don't, if you're a businessman, it doesn't take a lot of thought to know what happens in that condition. Mm-hmm. And so we're holding on in hopes that the government will help us with this dumping of Chinese hardwood plywood. And if we don't get that relief, the industry will continue to contract and it will go away.
And I agree with you on that point. And do you think, Tim, what does this case indicate about China's strategy towards the United States on trade? Does it send out a signal, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it shows that China takes a very long view of these matters. It's willing to enter very basic industries at the start, again, whether it's steel or aluminum or hardwood plywood and lumber industries. Overcapacity is a key to what they do. There's no concern about whether there is a market or a market in China for these products. And that is why exports have increased so much from China. It's also notable that this is really a long-term problem. In this trade case, we'll be looking at what's happened, the harm that's happened over the last 3 years. But I think there's a very strong argument that this has really happened over the course of 15 or 20 years, where we've seen 50,000 jobs lost, dozens of mills closed, again, showing that China has a long-term strategy here. And the only way to address it is to use the trade laws aggressively and to use enforcement aggressively, as the senator said. I think also Brad's point about moving up the value chain is a very important one. Once China takes market share on steel or on plywood, it's going to move to finished products. It's going to move to auto parts. It's going to move to things that are made out of hardwood plywood. So that's also very much a part of the strategy and something that's very concerning, and why it's important to draw a line in the sand right now.
Thank you. I think you can really talk to this, Brad. I know, well, I understand it's a bipartisan issue. You have a lot of facilities in North Carolina, and the last election, North Carolina was a swing state. Mm-hmm. When you talk to your workers out on the floor, many of whom would have voted for President Trump's America First strategy, what do you think a lot of these workers, some of them Republican voters who voted for the president, do they want to see decisive action from the administration on China's cheating? What do they when you walk the floors at your facility? What do they say to you? What do they want to see?
That's a great question, Mark, because I think you'll see it in the video later on in a few minutes. But I think as you travel through our mills in rural areas, West Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, they the same message, whether they voted for Trump or they voted for Hillary Clinton. The message is clear: is that they want something done. They speak, and I'd love to put you all on a bus and drive you from Portland, Oregon to Klamath Falls, or take you on a bus up to Craigsville, West Virginia, to see the devastation in some of these towns where people aren't employed. They're fearful of what's going to happen to them. And, you know, we talk about macroeconomics here, and it's micro for them. You know, they hear the talk about, well, we can't do that, we'll start a trade war. Well, these people believe they're in a trade war, and they're on the front lines, and so they need something. They need relief, and they expect it from the president.
You know, a lot of these, you've just saying, a lot of these workers expect relief from the administration. If the U.S. Department of Commerce and the ITC, they make an affirmative determination to impose duties retroactively, what type of positive impact would that have on the industry?
Oh, it's absolutely clear. I mean, more than half of the market is now with the Chinese. If there's a level playing field with fair trade, those jobs, that business will come back to the United States, and we'll have a thriving industry once again.
And Tim, maybe could you speak a little bit about the nature of the harm to this particular industry? You know, from a legal standpoint, how it.
Sure. Well, the Commission looks at the volume of imports, the pricing of the imports, and then the impact on the industry. And so, as you've heard, the imports are reached more than $1 billion. So this is a very sizable case, increase of 40%. And notably, the Chinese imports have taken market share directly from the U.S. industry. This is not an industry where China should have 50% market share. Again, they don't have a comparative advantage in these products. We have the timber, we have the most productive workers, we have the most efficient facilities. There's no reason for that to be happening. We've seen with regard to price that the Chinese imports are consistently 20, 30, 40, 50% below the same U.S. product on the shelves at major retailers. And then, unfortunately, you see the harm to this industry in terms of fewer workers, fewer hours worked, financial performance down in terms of gross or operating net profits, however you look at that. It harms research and development. It harms the ability to make capital investments to stay competitive. All of these things show the nature of the harm. And again, it has been going on for quite some time. The other thing that really hits me, and you'll see it in the video, is just the large number of communities that are affected by this. It really takes a huge network to have one of these hardwood plywood operations. You've got to have upstream suppliers, you've got to have customers, you've got to have support systems. And so I've done a lot of trade cases. This one really jumps out at me as one where the effects are broad across many, many towns and areas in our country.
And just one final question before we open it to the floor for you, Brad. I know yesterday when you were on Capitol Hill for meetings with legislators, and while I understand it's a bipartisan issue, what has your message been here to legislators in Washington, D.C.?
Well, you know, I grew up believing in free trade. And I mentioned to them, this isn't free, it's unfair trade. And our industry's at a breaking point, and if something's not done to stop this subsidization and dumped plywood into the United States, we're going to go away. And we're a perfect example. We're the bread and butter of the United States. We're a humble and modest industry, and I believe that it would be a travesty to lose it. And for illegal for illegal dumping, we can't accept it. And we've had broad support from both sides of the aisle regarding this message, and we are looking for their support as we move further into the case.
Well, thank you both for your comments. Now we're happy. I know my colleague Hannah has a floating mic. We're happy to open up the floor to questions from reporters or interested parties. We can take maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to air the compelling video. So happy, yeah, absolutely, I think.
Hi, Mary Berger with Washington Trade Daily. For Mr. Brightbill, how confident are you, or optimistic are you, that the final determinations will pretty much closely mirror the preliminaries, and that also that there will be critical circumstances found? And then for Mr. Thompson, how confident are you that your industry will recover if you get these duties in place? Thank you.
So to start on the case itself, this is a very strong case. There's a very strong case of subsidies, as have already been shown at the preliminary level, a very strong case of dumping. You see it every day, and so we think there will be substantial dumping margins by the time this case is resolved. And unfortunately, we have a very strong injury case as well in terms of the factors I just laid out. So we're very confident. We're not taking anything for granted. We're going to work hard to show the commission all the evidence and put it forward, but we have a very strong case. You also asked about critical circumstances, and that's important as well, because we have seen a surge of Chinese imports to beat the preliminary duties. Those duties are now in place on the subsidy side as of April, and in fact, the Commerce Department made them retroactive to January because they saw evidence of a massive surge of imports into the United States to try and beat those duties. And that surge itself has had very negative effects on this industry. So the Commission does not normally find critical circumstances. We think we have a very strong case here. In fact, there was testimony at the earlier ITC proceeding where importers talked about bringing in imports to try and beat the duties. So we think we've got very compelling evidence to show that those duties should be imposed retroactively.
So I think your question is how confident do I believe the industry will recover if the ITC is favorable to us? And I'm 100% confident in that regard. We have facilities that in previous days were running 3 shifts. In some cases, 7/24, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that aren't any longer. And so we're ready and have the capacity to take on the business that's needed if we have a favorable ruling.
Just to highlight that point, some of these mills are down to 1 shift or
That's
2
right.
shifts from
That's
3.
right.
So
That's right.
it's a very serious issue right now.
Thank you both. And if anyone has another question, and then we can go to the video. Sure.
Hi, I'm just a student. It's a question for, I guess, any of you or both of you. What do you think you can do to educate the American public and really encourage them to buy American, not only to, high-quality products that's supporting jobs and communities, but also your competitors from China are cheating. So what can you do to make the demand? I mean, I understand they're cheaper because they cheat, but how can you encourage really Americans and consumers to buy your products?
Well, I would say that we use that mantra all the time, buy American, support American industry. But the pure economics of the matter, when Chinese plywood is selling at, 30 and 40 and 50% discount to our product, the dollar speaks, and it's unfair. So to us, so we certainly promote that. But I'm afraid that the current state of the industry with the Chinese dumping in subsidies is making it exceedingly difficult to do.
I would just say I think that's why we're taking our message to the Hill. I think that's why we're taking it to the general public with this video that you're about to see, to point out, yes, it's a matter of playing by the rules. China is actually violating international trade law with these unfair trade practices, and that's why we need a remedy that addresses that price issue so that consumers don't have to make that choice. They can know that they're buying a high-quality product that's also a very competitive product.
Thank you. So we're going to conclude this morning's events by officially launching this very compelling video documentary. It depicts the concerns of ordinary U.S. hardwood plywood workers. It was filmed in Oregon, North Carolina, and upstate New York. And as you're going to see, these workers, they're not asking for any special treatment. They're just asking for a level playing field. As you know, this was the first case brought after President Trump was elected. And if this moves forward, it will be the first example of the Trump administration moving forward with a major trade case against the People's Republic of China. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Senator Wyden. And we appreciate you all being here with us today, and we'd like to conclude by airing this powerful documentary.
People need to work. People need to have value. Chinese are so dependent on exports, they can do anything to get a competitive advantage.
We wonder if we're going to be here next year, to be honest with you. As far as out on the floor, we've never seen it this bad.
I wonder how long it's going to be before there's 0 mills left in towns like Medford. We will continue to go downhill for generations.
We used to run 3 shifts here. That's approximately 150 people that were employed here. Now we're down to 1 shift.
The whole industry's at stake, and we're just going away. It's almost like a cancer that's growing.
What China's doing today to the North American hardwood plywood industry is one of the greatest thefts in the history of our country.
Over the past 2 years, the influx of dump-subsidized Chinese hardwood plywood has captured over 50% of the U.S. market share. If action is not taken by the Trump administration, the entire industry will be wiped out, costing the U.S. thousands of jobs.
When I started here in the late 80s and into the early 90s, we manufactured a lot more panels than we do today. I think the first thing that I saw happen was the furniture industry moved out of North America, and most of the furniture that we see today is manufactured offshore. In the last decade, we've seen an awful lot of panels coming in from other countries, China being the primary one. So we're making a lot less panels and employing a lot less people than we used to. The first half of my career here, I don't remember ever seeing any layoffs. And in the last decade, we've had layoffs, lots of short weeks, and we're just not pumping as much money into the local economy.
In Grants Pass, a town like ours relies on those large businesses to fund police, to fund sheriff, and keep the jail open. And so we're gonna have to make that up somehow if they did leave, and I don't think we could do that.
Well, if the mill was to close, I think I'd probably lose the house that I just had purchased. It's not just me, it's the whole community, because everybody puts back what they get out of working here back into the town. Some of the small businesses would probably suffer greatly.
In rural North Carolina, public education is crucial. It's an equalizer for people like me and people like my constituents who come from rural areas of our state, to give them an opportunity. And if it wasn't for entities like Columbia, Carolina, we wouldn't have that opportunity. We wouldn't be able to fund public education. We wouldn't be able to fund our law enforcement, our public safety entities. All of that comes from organizations and companies like Columbia. So without them, we wouldn't be able to provide the services that we need to provide in areas like McDowell County.
So I'm the youngest out of the generation for my family. My grandpa worked here for 50 years, and then my father's worked here for about 25 plus, and then my uncle and my cousins. So pretty much it's a family tradition. I'm 3rd generation at Timber Products.
My dad started working here in 1956. He was here for 51 years. I've had uncles that have worked here, 2 cousins. My brother works right next to me. He has been my whole life. The first time I walked in here, I was 4 years old.
Biggest impact on us is 80% of a kitchen is made up now of import. Most of our products are used in kitchen cabinetry. You know, we used to produce a lot of furniture, but most of the furniture is made in China now. Well, if nothing is done to curb the influx of Chinese imports, I see the kitchen cabinet industry going the same way that the furniture industry went, which will be consumed with Chinese cabinets, which will decimate what's left of our industry. I mean, there will be nothing left. We're almost at a critical mass point where if something's not done and done soon, the whole industry is at stake, at risk, of imploding. I mean, just going away.
The business is slow. We might be down to 3 or 4 days a week. So morale, it takes a big toll around here. You know, people start wondering, am I going to have, you know, the money in my check this week to pay my bills, to put food on the table, to, you know, to buy a coat for my kid. It's one of those things where a month from now we could go down because we don't have the orders because China's taken over.
Definitely scared of losing my job. Because like I said, my husband works here too, so if I lose my job, then he loses his, and then what are we gonna do?
We can compete with anybody with speed, price, and quality with hardwood plywood as long as we're on an even playing field.
We have 6 kids, and none of them have been encouraged to come to work in the plywood industry because of the way it looks and things are dying.
I would ask President Trump to enforce the trade policies on the book hold China's feet to the fire so it's a fair playing field for everybody.
We're really counting on President Trump to remove the unfair subsidies that the Chinese are using to dump plywood in the United States.
President Trump needs to stop the Chinese from cheating us out of our jobs and stand up for us, keep us working, not worry about them.
President Trump, you need to stand up to what you've promised us. Stop China from dumping all of their plywood here.
President Trump, we need you to put American hardwood plywood manufacturers first.
President Trump needs to make sure that we are playing on a level playing field.
Manufacturing is the basis of all wealth. If we don't keep the American worker working, we're going to become a service economy, and we will continue to go downhill for generations.